There may be members of the audience who have been particularly enamored of consent as a method of justification for the state, and I may have made them rather uneasy over the past few minutes in demonstrating its weaknesses. If any of you find yourselves ill at ease, I apologize, but I did not mean to leave you in that condition for long. I hope to provide you with a way to justify the state's use of force that retains the most appealing element of consent, the prominence of individual freedom and basic rights, without frustrating us through irresolvable practical quandaries. The first step in developing a teleological account of state justification is naming the ends or goals that the state must realize in order to be justified. States will be justified to the extent that they accomplish these goals and unjustified to the extent that they fail. Let us then recognize a necessary and universal moral injunction. Persons have a duty to promote justice in the world. Now, let us recognize a fact about the world at large. Life in a state characterized by order and general security is qualitatively superior to life in a state characterized by anarchy. The model I put forward establishes two primary goals for states. Firstly, to procure at least a minimally acceptable level of justice by protecting the basic rights and freedoms of its citizens. And secondly, to establish order and basic security such that persons are capable of living minimally decent lives. This teleological model is justified because states are the most effective instruments for promoting justice and upholding order and basic security. Individuals acting on their own are not able to bring about either of these ends, and I propose that any state which accomplishes the two objectives I have just named cannot do so except through establishing the rule of law and generating the substance of that law through democratic processes. For clarity's sake, I will recap. A just state will accomplish two necessary goals: providing baseline justice and general order and security through two necessary techniques: the rule of law and democracy. The characteristics of baseline justice are partly indeterminate because the basic rights and freedoms that citizens will want their laws to protect may vary from culture to culture. However, the conceptual nature of justice demands that any rights that are protected by law for one person or group must be protected for all persons and groups. We recognize this basic equality in our Declaration of Independence. It is listed first among the self-evident truths. All men are created equal. States which favor one group or discriminate against another cannot possibly be justified according to the goals of the state as I've laid them out. The two necessary techniques all just states must employ, the rule of law and democracy, are the procedural and political manifestations of this basic equality. The rule of law simply indicates a state of affairs in which no one is above the law. It is contrasted with the rule of men, in which those who make the law exempt themselves from it. Democracy is the expression of the fundamental political equality of all citizens. Non-democratic states cannot be justified because they are denying the political equality inherent in the notion of justice. In order for a democracy to be considered functional, certain basic rights must be protected by law. They are similar to those cataloged within the First Amendment to our Constitution: the right to believe freely, the right to speak freely, the right to print freely, and the right to peaceably assemble. Justified states must be democratic states, and since democracy is not democracy without these protections, justified states must protect these basic rights and freedoms. Incidentally, it is worthwhile to note that democracy does not constitute consent to the state for the same reasons supplied earlier. Since the background conditions are not being met, participating in a democracy does not correspond to a free choice between consenting and dissenting. In addition to the rights that underlie a functioning democracy, all states, regardless of cultural variations, must ensure the protection of another set of basic rights if they are to establish a baseline level of justice. Slavery is an irredeemably unjust institution, and no justified state can permit its existence. The right to basic freedom, or to not be subject to the will of another person, must be entrenched in the law of all just states. This protection would also forbid the imprisonment of any person by the state without due process. Protections of basic rights of bodily integrity are also paramount in achieving justification, and just states that ensure them will not permit bodily searches without cause and due process, nor will they practice cruel and unusual punishment. The right to be exempt from cruel and unusual punishment, that is, the right not to be tortured, ought to be the most intuitively grasped requirement of justice. Any state that tortures persons, or does not specifically establish in law and practice each person's right not to be tortured cannot possibly be justified. Beyond these rigid and incontrovertible protections of rights and freedoms, what justice requires can vary from state to state based on the cultural values of the citizenry. The right to own personal property does not appear to be necessary to a just state. We can imagine a state whose citizens share a culture that does not have a robust concept of property or privacy, yet which can nonetheless still be justified by promoting justice and maintaining the rule of law. Certainly, in our own nation, where we believe each person has a right to property, the state could probably not be justified without securing property and privacy in law. But these are not essential to the justification of states as a general rule. Now that we have examined the characteristics a minimally acceptable level of justice would have to possess, let us turn to the second goal of the state, order and basic security. States that maintain order through the rule of law and secure all persons against physical attack enable individuals to cooperate in ways that greatly increase the quality of life for virtually all persons. When persons no longer spend a great deal of time and effort in seeking to protect themselves from others, industry and community can blossom. The underpinnings of modern society, science, medicine, industrialized agriculture, transportation infrastructure, and economic specialization are founded on a mutual confidence among persons that each will respect the other's rights and keep his or her word. Allowing oneself to trust other persons in this way is only practicable when the state holds its mighty apparatus of justice equally over all our heads. Beyond the purely material advantages, it is not clear that things such as art, literature, and music could flourish and be enjoyed by large numbers of people without the rule of law and the cooperation and security engendered by the order it brings. The most important benefit of order and security, however, is the way in which it encourages meaningful human relationships to thrive. True friendships and deep love between partners would be very unlikely to come about in states of anarchy due to the harsh nature of life. If anyone doubts the indispensable way in which living in an ordered society under the rule of law improves the quality of our lives, witness the depravity of the human condition in Darfur. People have mostly been reduced to existing either as the prey of roaming militias who endure unspeakable rights violations, or as the recruits who are forced to commit atrocities. Order seems as crucial to the justification of states as is a concern for justice. Indeed, the two seem deeply intertwined. It is not clear how a state could promote justice without also establishing order and security. We now come to the unsettled but all-important question I have been putting off. Are there, according to the model of justification at which we have arrived, any justified states in the world? I would have to say, yes. I find it highly likely that there is at least one state in the world that is justified in exercising coercive force against its citizens. If pressed on exactly which states might be justified, I would point to the Scandinavian countries or perhaps Iceland. Unfortunately, the vast majority of states in the world do not achieve the goals necessary for justification. They promote justice poorly, or not at all. Some states even fail to meet the requirement of order and security. What of this? What was the point of crafting a teleological model of political justification if it leaves us in essentially the same position as the consent law, namely, wallowing in the knowledge that our state is not justified? The benefit of the teleological model is this. Even though the requirements of justice render most existing nations in the world unjustified, there is a way to improve them so that they are justified and legitimate. To my mind, consent's most disturbing flaw is not that it does not justify any states, but that it could not justify any states without a radical reordering of the entire world system, such that dissenting citizens would not be exiled. Even though such an arrangement might theoretically be possible, I confess I cannot imagine what it would look like, much less how to realize it in the world. The teleological alternative I have supplied does not suffer from this defect, nor is it weakened by a lack of citizen consent. The way to justification, though certainly not simple, is at least feasible. States must respect the basic rights of all persons and promote justice in the world. Democratic reforms and legal protections of the fundamental moral interests of all persons are strong first steps in the right direction. Most importantly, states must cease perpetrating injustices against individuals, such as the torture of persons merely suspected of possessing information the state presumes is valuable. If we wish our nation to be even remotely justifiable, we cannot continue to ignore what justice requires of us. Thank you.